Hey everyone, and welcome back to On Air with Phoenician Hunter and 369 Lumineer. So usually we're all about the Phoenicians and Phoenician Hunter's research, which are taken from his articles off his Substack channel. So we discuss their history, their culture, and all that fascinating stuff. But today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to take a bit of a detour in this episode and open up the floor to some, well, let's say wild and sometimes pretty strange topics that have been on our minds lately, which we generally discuss offline. Stuff like ancient pyramids, lost civilizations, great resets, etc. So think of this episode like, I don't know, a conversation lounge where no ideas too out there, no question too big, and we're free to make some surprising connections. And this is going to be like a rogue podcast where we just free flow the conversation. So get comfy, grab a drink, maybe come along as we wander through history, science, conspiracy, and culture with curiosity and obviously an open mind. So let's jump into episode 25, which we've called Meeting of the Minds. So, Phoenician Hunter, welcome.
Hello. It's good to be back for another one. Like you mentioned, yeah, we're just gonna sort of freeball this one, and we haven't really prepared for it because it's gonna be, based mostly on just opinions. I mean, some of the topics we're gonna explore, I've looked into, I've done some background research into, but nothing in depth. They're not topics that I usually address in my Substack because
Mm.
they sort of don't fit into part of the story that I'm trying to tell. But, they're things I've looked into, and a lot of people ask me my opinion on some of these topics. So we thought we would address them here and, sort of have some fun with it. This is just speculation, again, based on common sense, like I approach all my research. So yeah, let's get
Okay.
into it.
Well, that's good. So that's similar to you. These are topics that are dear to my heart and topics that I've done a lot of research on. So, look, let's jump straight into it. I'd like to firstly kick it off with a topic that's, well, pretty much front and center everywhere right now. Well, at least it is with the platforms that I consume. It's in the headlines, it's on people's feeds, it's part of late night conversations, and that's artificial intelligence and machine learning. We know it's moving fast, it's changing things literally in real time. And I guess depending on who you ask, it's either the biggest breakthrough since the internet or it's the beginning of something we're not quite ready for. So let's do a bit of a grounded check in. So, tell me what you actually feel when you hear the words artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree that it's like I view it as the internet 2.0 almost. It's going to be it is already, but it's going to be even more impactful on our lives moving forward, just like the printing press was, and just like the internet is. And people who criticize it need to be reminded we're at the early stages of it. It's only going to improve. I guess in a way, I sort of parts of me fear it, but I mean that's normal when you're confronted with something like this. I mean, people fear the internet, printing press as well. Really, what is it trying to achieve? And what it's trying to achieve is trying to almost be the central thinking or mind for the masses. This is a sort of a departure from the internet, I guess, and the printing. Well, no, I don't know. Is it a departure?
I don't think it is. But finish your thought, and
Yeah,
I'll
my
jump
thought
in.
is like, if you look back at those, the internet and the printing press, you were inundated with lots of sources and information, right? I don't believe, AI is presenting you with any new information. What it does, and you're probably going to explain a little bit better than I am, is that, it's gathering all the general information that's out there and compiling it and presenting it to you when people ask it a question. I just feel what it's going to do is just going to funnel people into one mindset. But again, I think the printing press did that as well, and so
Mm,
did the
mm,
internet,
mm,
where
mm,
they're going to funnel you into certain ways of thinking and certain beliefs as well.
mm.
So in that way, it sort of concerns me. But I mean, I don't think it's any different to, like the previous tools I mentioned. So yeah,
Yeah,
in
look,
that way, it has the same impact.
I kind of agree with you. I'm all embracing of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I've written quite a few articles on its disruption in a number of different industries, from, as you and I both know, being ex-advertising industry people, that it's decimated that industry, and it
Yeah,
will.
a lot of other industries are feeling it too today. Tech,
That's right. So not only has it destroyed, say, the advertising industry, but it's continuing to destroy, HR, law, finance, service consulting, etc. Now, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Now, depending on who you talk to, but my view of artificial intelligence, and I think in this instance we're talking about LLMs, which are the ChatGPTs and the DeepSeeks and the Perplexities of the world, where people can just literally type in a prompt and off you go. It's given you a thesis or whatever it gives you. And you're right, it does take a collation of what's currently on the web. But what it does do, it doesn't actually just collate those and go, here's a dump, a copy and paste of what I've done. The way that artificial intelligence, which is why they call it intelligence, is that it analyzes that information and it gives you, based on I guess, external human interaction from the internet, what it, and I use this word lightly, what it thinks it should give you. That's why people are talking about prompts, and prompts
yeah.
need to be quite,
What
quite
do you mean by what it
articulate.
thinks? What do you?
Okay, so you could say, okay, write me an opening speech for a TED talk on sustainability. So what it's going to do is it's going to scan the web. It's going to say, well, okay, I've come up with all these articles that have been in the mainstream that talk about sustainability, and I will now collate that into what my programs have told me to do, is to try and generate some insights from that information. So it will say, point A is this, and this is what my program is telling me to decipher this point as being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but okay, and this has been proven by people that it is programmed to spit out certain
Correct.
results,
That's right.
and specifically, if you ask a questions relating to Israel, for instance,
Okay,
or World War
absolutely.
II, or events
Yes.
there,
Yes.
you know,
They'll label you as,
um,
it'll come back saying, I either don't compute
no, it
or
computes, but it favors an Israeli Jewish point of view
narrative. Right.
narrative. So,
Yeah.
that's why I was saying earlier, it's going to funnel people into a certain way of thinking. And
Right.
also, I find it very convenient that this sort of technology becomes available at a time when they're screaming about depopulation and,
Mm.
there's not going to be enough people to do a certain amount of work in the future where AI comes out and helps that situation by being able to do the work of many, so you don't
Okay.
need as many people. Yeah.
Is that
Well,
necessarily a bad thing? Because I want to counter that
no,
by,
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I said it's convenient that it comes out at this time. So, they've obviously planned its release around this time when they say the population, we need assistance because there's not going to be as many people in the future to do the work that's required.
okay.
Um,
Well,
that's all.
okay, so the byproduct of that is, job displacement across, say, white collar industries, or as you've just mentioned, algorithmic bias is what I refer to it as, which means that the algorithm decides what it's going to spit out, and whether it's an Israeli
Yeah.
narrative or whether it's I don't have information on this person. I guess there was one discussion that was happening during the US elections where people would post on TikTok actual screenshots of them typing in, something along the lines of, what is Biden's policy on X war, let's say, and it would spit out pages of their policy. But then when the same question was asked, what is Trump's policy on whatever the topic, it would come back and say, I don't
Exactly. No,
prescribe to
that
political narratives,
yeah,
etc.
that was my point I was trying to make, that it's obviously biased. And
Mm.
but then again, like I said earlier, I mean, so was the printing press. I mean, you're not going to find books published. You're going to need to dig quite deep to find obscure books about alternative history, or the
Mm. Mm.
alternative viewpoint on events during World War II. They're never going to be mainstream. They're never going to be published. So I see exactly the same way. It's going to
Mm.
give you the narrative that whatever the elite or the current rulers of the world want you to view and to.
Yeah.
I just, want people to be mindful of being too dependent on it. And you don't want to turn the human race into a zombie
No.
race. But I mean, you can argue they already are, where they're not. If you stop using your mind,
Mm.
it's not gonna be working for you.
Okay, so and that's a perfect point. And this is where I embrace AI as a collaborator, let's call it, because it does have some pros and it obviously has some cons. But that's with any introduction of anything new, like you said, the printing press, for example. From my perspective, I see it as there's an acceleration of research, for example, across medicine, accessibility, technology, etc. And also, in my field of writing, your field of design, coding, etc. So there are a lot of pros that come with advanced technology. By the same token, there are some cons, and as you've rightly said, but I do want to raise now whether you believe this person. I'm going to mention Elon Musk here because he's obviously big in AI and tech and so forth. He said one thing. It was a conference at MIT. I think it was around 2014, so about 10 or 11 years ago, where he said, with artificial, and this is, mind you, 10 or 11 years, he said, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. Now, what do you make of that?
Okay, that's good that you brought that up, because with all these technologies and actually with everything in the world that we see, there's always an occult side to everything. Okay,
Mm,
so
mm,
there's this hidden occult side, and nothing. It's the same with AI, and the way I see it, artificial intelligence. What's the intelligence? The intelligence is the mind. All right.
mm,
So
mm,
what they're trying to do is create this artificial mind that so it works as the mind would, and give you the answers, give you direction, give you whatever. And when we look at what's going on in the world today, and we touched on this in a previous podcast,
mm.
um, when we discussed a prophecy and Israel,
That's right.
their goal is to build this temple of Solomon, and the temple I've always maintained is the mind. The temple is the mind.
Mm,
So the temple of Solomon is what is this mind of God,
mm.
the mind. So with artificial intelligence, I believe that's what they've done. That's what they've created or tried to create. They're trying to be, like, they're trying to replace God, or bring God down here. And that's what I believe the Temple of Solomon is, and AI, is the manifestation of that idea.
Okay, I like that analogy. So, are you anti or pro?
Well, then you can say, am I anti-books or anti-internet? It's the same thing. There's good and bad with everything. I
Mm-hmm.
just feel if people become too dependent on it, like I said, they're just going to be, if you don't use your brain, and you're handing your brain over to the computer, yeah, you don't use it, you're going to lose it.
No, no, I completely agree. But again, where do we draw the line? And this is probably a good discussion point, a much broader and longer discussion point, which we won't do because we've got a number of topics to cover today. But where do you draw the line on technology? Where does it reach the point where we solely rely on technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning?
I think this stuff creeps up on you without you having too much consent over it. Like, for example, I received a question by a subscriber the other day, airing their concerns about, this whole digital ID kind of
Hmm.
world that, they're trying to usher in. And I said, digital ID. I said, so do you have ID with you?
Hmm.
And yes. So is it connected to a digital database? So like if a policeman asks for your ID and he punches it in, where's it going? It's in a digital database. You're already in there, are you not?
Correct.
Right? Okay. In the Western world, mostly people use credit cards. Am I
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
What that's digital, isn't it? Isn't it? It's operated digitally.
Correct.
You're not handing over cash. You know, so we're already in this predicament.
Yep.
And people, are afraid of it or want to, say, let's not go there. It's too late. You're already in it. If you use a credit card or if you've got an ID, even if it's a card in your hands, it's still connected to a digital database.
Mhm.
All your information is on, you know,
Yeah, and if banks have the ability nowadays to freeze accounts and
yeah,
to not allow you to withdraw over a certain amount because they need to know where the money's going, and I understand from a money laundering perspective and human trafficking and all that sort of stuff, I get it. But the fact that they have the control to do that means that we, of course, we are in a digital age with digital
we are.
IDs, etc., which I think is a nice little segue into bring into the discussion the Great Reset, which, as you've just mentioned, it's the elites trying to control, or at least already have started to control from a digital perspective. And you and I have discussed plenty of times, both online and offline, about the WEF, the United Nations, the WHO, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I've touched on the Great Reset in my book, towards the end of my book, because I felt that that was a good way to end it, and what I felt was the agenda moving forward, because it has a lot of different, meanings to people. So reset is to put something back into its original position.
Mm,
Okay, that's what it means. So, first of all, when you're talking about digital in the age of digital, I've mentioned before that, we're in the age of, Aquarius, the air sign.
mm,
We're going to go into a digital age. I mean, air, digital, they're moving us, they're sinking the ship. We're no longer in the water. You
mm,
know, that's the way I see it. So, and I believe we've already been the age of Aquarius for quite a while.
yep, yep,
It's just that now you're starting to see the manifestation of all the things they've implemented, because they implemented them slowly and over a long period of time. So,
yep,
all right,
yep,
going back to the Great Reset, I think, all right, so to put something back into its original position, I view it as a program. So they're putting the program back.
mm, mm,
So a program to me, and I've always maintained, is language. Okay, so we operate off a language. What we speak, our thoughts,
mm,
they manifest through what we say. So if you control the language, you're going to control the program, right?
mm.
And consequently, the environment that comes out of that. So if you need to reset something, to me, you got to reset the program. And if you're resetting the program, you're resetting the language.
Is this where you see AI or LLMs coming into
Well, not necessarily.
the
This is
scene?
where I see, and I explain it further in my book, sort of almost the decline of English and the English world, because they represent the current ruling order in the world. And people have argued with me with this, but I say, what program is the world running off? Predominantly English, right?
Mm.
They dominate everything. They dominate the sciences, the media, even sports, entertainment.
Well, do you know, I found out just on that, I found out an
Yep.
interesting fact, and maybe our listeners can correct me on this, but if you want a peer-reviewed article to be approved and published, it
Yep.
needs
It's got to
it
be in English.
it has to be in English.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before. Yeah, it won't even be looked at. Yeah, you
Wow.
have. Yeah, so they dominate the world. Okay, in every department. It's not just, like I said, like you've just said, medicine, science, entertainment, sports. They dominate. So if you need a reset, English needs to go. Otherwise, what are you resetting?
Well,
You just. So to me, you're resetting the program. You got to reset it, and the way you reset that is through language. So you're either going to adopt an older language. That's what reset means, to put back in its original position, an older language or a modified older language. And, I've made the case for Latin.
can I just maybe bring it back a little bit in terms
Mm.
of what the Great Reset actually is. So obviously language is a big part of it, but it's also, and the term was coined at the 2020 World Economic Forum, where they wanted to reset capitalism after what happened with COVID-19, right? Or during COVID-19. So their agenda was, building more sustainable economies, addressing inequality, integrating climate action into recovery, etc. Do you feel that language is the main driver of that?
Of course, but I mean, what are they saying there? They're not resetting anything. What they're doing is implementing new policies. There's never been a world historically. No, there was no such thing as equality and all.
Mm,
All those things you've mentioned were not part of capitalism. In the past or the
mhm,
economy. These
mhm.
are new ideas. These are new things they're trying to implement. That to me that isn't a reset. That isn't going back to its original position.
Do you see this as being just some, I guess, vague language which is trying to mask centralized control, for example?
No, I think they're trying to tell you something, but it depends how you read into it. And the way I've read into it is, like I said, I mean, what's happening today in the West is it's been inundated by immigration, people from different cultures, and it's having an effect where the native societies and cultures are disappearing in
Mm,
people. So I think that's done on purpose for a certain reaction. And we're, I think, going to enter a phase now where we're already seeing a reaction, but that reaction hasn't manifested into the physical yet. People are
mm,
talking about being upset about it, disgruntled, but it hasn't manifested into action,
mm.
right? That's what I think the next phase is, and that's where I see the Great Reset coming into it. What does everyone want, or most people in the West want? Their countries to go back to what they were, or how they remember them,
Sovereignty, yeah.
or how they remember them,
Mm,
right? So, for instance, if you're, French or Spanish or Italian, or English, you want your country to be predominantly, of English extraction. You want it to
mm.
go back. So you're resetting it. That's what I see the Great Reset will achieve,
Okay,
or,
well,
yeah, the
can
manifestation of that.
okay, so can I challenge you with this question then? So, why did so many people around the world, and those that were very vocal, not just on social media, but at events and so forth, why did they interpret this Great Reset as some sort of cover for authoritarianism,
Fear.
economic
What do
economic
most people
restructuring,
push?
digital surveillance?
Yeah, what do most people push? And like you said, influencers and that
Mm,
for clickbait.
mm,
All they do, it's always fear based.
mm.
Or they're coming for your ID, digital ID. We've already got that.
Yeah,
What are you trying
yeah,
to scare people into? You've already got it. You've had it for years.
you're right.
You know, the same shit with nuclear war and World War Three. There's so many accounts. World War Three. I mean, just listen to Alex Jones if you want fear-based propaganda. He's
Yeah.
always yelling and screaming about the next thing
I
that's
know
going to kill
sometimes
everyone.
it's a bit unbearing listening to him because he
Well,
yells.
it's the same with the Great Reset.
Yeah,
People have jumped on it. Yeah, fear. I can sell some books here. Fear sells.
of course.
Fear. One of
Y-
the reasons why
Yeah,
I have very little support and following because I never jump on that big
yeah.
fear propaganda train.
What is the ultimate? I guess the ultimate target, especially if you want to use that terminology to the elites, is that they're like energy vampires. They base
Yeah,
things on fear
energy.
because
Yeah,
that's what drives them.
yeah, but fear also drives people. That's why
Mm,
horror films are so popular as well.
mm. Oh, I can't stand horror films.
Yeah, but I mean, they're extremely people are driven to that, to
Yeah.
fear and anxiety and those feelings that people are. They just are.
I've never understood. I've only probably seen half a dozen horror films in my life, and the very first one I recall, I think I was around about 12 years old. I saw. Do you remember Salem's Lot? It was a movie that came out in the late 70s. I'll tell you right now that I couldn't sleep for weeks as a young kid. And I think that put me off horror movies from the very get-go. And sure, I've seen movies like The Exorcist and, The Omen, etc. But other than that, I don't get why people are drawn to horror movies.
Yeah, but it's very appealing to to a lot of people. I'm with you. It's never appealed to me personally. Yeah. I
Um,
just want to go back on some points, if I may.
of course.
Um, yeah. So when we're talking about AI and the similarities with the printing press, don't forget. I mean, that's when they pushed the propaganda of the time, which at the time was Christianity. That's when all the Bibles,
Printed the
were
first.
produced.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and that program, rolled out. So, and the other thing with AI is, I think another reason it's beneficial or to the powers that be is that they can switch a program instantly. So, okay, so at the moment, the program is, multiculturalism, diversity, and all that bullshit,
Right.
right? They can switch it within, instantly, and then responses to questions will change, and you'll say, oh, diversity is a threat to the native population, or
Mm-hmm.
you will start getting answers to questions that are maybe politically in a different direction to what they are now. So this is why I also reckon it's been implemented. It's a tool for them just as much as it is for us, and they can switch a program instantly, switch the language, switch, where they want people to levitate towards.
So you're saying it changes the cultural narrative, basically.
It changes the narrative easily, and it does it quickly. That's another, thing to keep in mind, and why it might be used.
Okay. Well, this probably is probably another good little segue into, I guess, the current state that we're in as humanity, as a not as a society, as a species. I want to touch on the Age of Aquarius, which you and I have spoken about on a number of occasions in the past. Do you think that, and again, AI is very, very much part of this, do you think that this is a real astronomical shift based on your research with Phoenicians, etc., and dating back thousands of years, or is it purely symbolic?
No, I've written about this before, and the merchant class that I write about really align everything that they do with, astrology, or what we would term astrology, but with the celestial heavens, or the celestial bodies, and cycles, and their influence on the earth and the minds of people.
Mm.
I've written about this before, and yeah, everything they do is in line with that. It's where they gain most of their power from, because what they implement is harnessed. It's sort of increased by this influence that we can't see, but we can feel. Okay, so yeah, everything they do is in line with that. And the Age of Aquarius, like I've said, I believe we're already in it, because it's not an instant, transformation. You're not, in Pisces one day and Aquarius the next. It's sort of, it blends from one to the other, a slow period. And I believe, signs of the age of air were with the introduction of radio,
Mm.
aeroplanes, all those air-based technologies. And like I said earlier, we are there with, our ID, with
Mm.
our
Mm.
monetary system. Crypto is just the next evolution of that. And, you can try and fight it all you want. I think it's just going to go the way that they've planned it and
Yeah.
implemented it.
So we know, anyone knows if they've just done any top line or desktop research on this, that Aquarius, the sign, is associated with innovation, social progress, and what I think is a collective awakening. Do you think that?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I was going to say,
No, that's good.
do you think that movements like what we've spoken about, artificial intelligence, climate activism, are these signs of this shift, or are we just looking at a typical socio-political evolution?
No, I think those things are just sort of programmed propaganda that people, easily are sort of driven to.
Right.
But when you said the awakening, and what I think that is, again, I've written about it. We're entering a phase where, it's spoken about in ancient religions, from the East especially. It's in their doctrines that
Mhm.
this energy comes round, and the sun is a conduit between us and this energy. So we
Mm.
get it through the sun, and this energy is, as you would say, an awakening force, an awakening to a sort of state of, what some would call revelation, or making a connection with what they would term God. I don't like using that word because it's
Mhm.
been that term has been taken to mean, like, for instance, in the doctrines that we're exposed to, predominantly Christianity in the West, it means something that is not what I'm referring to in this instance. Okay, this energy.
Are you referring to God? No?
Yeah, I am, but I don't like using that term because I don't want people to interpret it like, oh, Jesus Christ or
I think,
Yahweh or Allah.
yeah, you're right, and I think a lot of people have gone beyond that, particularly in the sort of literature that I read about God. We are
Yeah.
God, and this is, again, if you look at the Bible, this is what it tried to portray. As you've said plenty of times, it's a metaphor, allegory.
Okay, let's use it like that. Yeah, the creative force of the universe, for
Correct.
the
Okay.
divine creative force. Let's use it in that term, all right?
Good. Good. Okay.
So this energy comes about at a certain time, again, because, well, it's always present, but it's amplified at a certain time through, the celestial cycles. And these merchant class that I keep going on about know about this. I
Mm,
mean, anyone who studied the ancient doctrines would know when this is coming. And
mm,
then people refer to it, oh, it's entering in a golden age, or it's
yeah.
entering this. Anyway, this energy is going to come, and it's going to affect everyone. Now, it affects people differently
Mm,
depending on your state of mind or your beliefs. And I've had experiences through, people that I know that have had this experience, okay? And some people, for instance, I know one person who's ended up in an asylum, and he was there for 10 years,
oh
okay?
goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know another person who went into, an asylum, but he was there for a short period, like 8 months or something,
Mm,
but completely lost the plot. But then I've known other people that have had a similar experience that, left their family, left their husband, they completely felt the need to completely change their whole lifestyle or their life.
mm,
And it is this energy, it's a difficult thing to discuss, but my understanding of it is that the way it comes about is it's almost like you're given a test, and you need to face everything that you've done in your life, all your choices, your regrets, and almost come to peace with it. Peace is a big one. You need to come to peace and forgive yourself and forgive, whatever's transpired in your life or whatever you feel guilty about or whatever. And people call it judgment. These all these themes from the Christian Bible,
mm.
they're borrowed from older things. They're not new. They're not original to the Christian doctrine. They're still helpful, okay? Because they've always been part of human thought, okay? Because they've experienced it before. God didn't just start when Jesus came. It was
Mm.
this energy has been here forever, and our interpretation of it, is what changes.
So
Not,
when you talk about the age of Aquarius, so if we want to use, let's say, common sense logic, using ancient texts, etc., we talk about the transition from, we've come from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. So when you look at zodiac signs, I think from memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, it happens every 2,000 odd years or whatever. This is
2,400 or
two,
something.
yeah, 2,400 or thereabouts, right? So it's based on, again, it's based on slow astronomical phenomenon, and I think they term this the precession of the equinoxes, and it
Yeah,
looks at
and
the
good
Earth,
point.
the Earth's axial wobble, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
And
so yeah, go on.
no, I was just going to say, like, every age changes, the program changes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's new religions. Okay. There's new, like I would say, new language, new dominant language, a new program, a new way of, new technologies, it's a complete, reset. I believe the Great Reset is related to the age of Aquarius. It happens around the same time.
In your view, is this a natural progression or is this by design?
Like I said, I think it's an energy, and then the people who know about it use it to implement a reset of, things that can manifest in the material world,
mm,
because
mm,
they sort of jump on this wave, this energy, and they jump on it. It helps them. It helps it manifest. You see, they use that energy to implement what they need to.
mm.
Yeah, they can manipulate the minds of people at this time. And this is why also I think the chemtrails and blocking out the sun and,
Yep,
and, and that
yep,
kind of thing,
yep.
I think it's related to sort of slowing down or blocking or
Okay.
this energy from coming through. Or yeah, I think it's related to that energy coming through the sun and them trying to, screw with it in some way. That's what
Mm.
I think that is about.
Okay. Well, that's a theory, of course, and
Yeah, this is
I
what we're about today. Just
well, of course it is, and I'll tell you right now, I subscribe to that theory. But in your view, let's take a much broader view. Does the Age of Aquarius promise some sort of enlightenment, or is it complete chaos?
It's both. Like I said, and those examples I gave, this energy that people were able to tap into,
Mm,
some have it's ruined their lives.
mm.
And with others, they've embraced it, and it's changed their lives for the good. Yeah, it's just you got to, you know, okay. The explanation I've been given about what they experience is something like there's no concept of time. Time stands still. There's no
Hmm.
concept of time. You're presented with your past
That's right.
instantly. It's like it's right. Presented. In the present.
Well, everything is happening concurrently. So
Yeah,
your
exactly,
past, your
exactly.
future, your present is happening
Yeah,
right this moment.
yeah, and you're presented with something that is described as just pure love.
Mm, mm.
That's the energy you feel.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it all depends on you and your state and where you are in your life and how what you take from it. That's
Well,
the best way I can describe it. I mean, it hasn't happened to me personally. I'm just
mm.
explaining from what, other people's experience.
And I agree with you because if you look at astrology a little deeper, and I think you've done quite a bit of work on this, you could say that we know that Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus is linked to innovation, rebellion, sudden change, like you've actually
Change, yeah,
said,
it's a
right?
big one.
So we can look at AI. That's a rapid technological advancement, right? We can look at the emphasis currently on freedom, human rights, equality. We can look at the shifting from hierarchical structures to networks and decentralized systems, for example. We can look at people that challenge the traditional structures of religion, politics, and the economy. Right.
Yeah,
So,
everything's going to go through some kind of transformation. And
mhm,
as you've mentioned all those things, that's exactly what we see,
mhm,
and the other thing is, your viewpoint, well, people's viewpoint is influenced by their beliefs, right?
mhm,
So if you hold Islamic beliefs or Christian beliefs and you take all that stuff literally and then you're presented with an experience like I explained,
mhm,
you're going to project your belief onto that experience rather than going into that experience as a little child not knowing.
mhm,
That makes a difference, okay? Now that's important. That makes a real difference to what you're going to get out of it.
mhm.
If you're projecting what you want it to be, it's going to be different to the experience, how it should have been naturally in its natural state.
Yeah,
Okay, it's just
yeah,
yeah,
I agree. And the one thing that really points that to me anyway, that we are in this new age. We've gone from Pisces to Aquarius. Is what I call the rejection of traditional authority. And we can see this happening on a daily basis. So people are starting to show a decline in institutional trusts, for example, churches, governments, corporations. You see this happening everywhere. If you're heavily involved on social media, this is what, again, the narrative that I see coming through, right?
yeah. But I think that's been programmed that way on purpose. They want people to rebel and stuff. You know why? Because then they'll give you a system that you agree with. So that what they're doing is tearing down all the old, like you said, the old institutions, the old
Mm.
things that people are rebelling against. They're not working. So they'll, okay, you don't want this one, we'll give you a new one then
Okay,
that
so
will.
how would you use that argument? Again, this is another, let's call it a trait of the Age of Aquarius, is the rise of, again, what I would term grassroots activism. So we're talking whistleblowers, we're talking independent journalism, and I've been personally affected by that. So,
But who says that that wasn't the case in the past? Anyone know about Giordano Bruno? You know, his ideas. I mean, he was a rebel. He went against the system, burnt at the stake for it. If you look at history, there's been people like that. It's just,
but
you
what
know,
I'm
not,
saying here is the rise of this activism. So, we've had
yeah,
Julian Assange, we've had
yeah, but that's what I'm
Snowden.
saying. Those things are all, they're all part of the system. They're manifestations of it. They're giving you these heroes. They're giving you these. It's like you could say the same about climate change. We know now that it's part of the globalist system. That's an operation of theirs. But originally, when it started, it was more of a grassroots kind of natural, or
Sure.
it appeared to be that way,
Hmm.
right? So I don't believe that a lot of these things that you've mentioned are a
Anything
natural,
right.
authentic
But no,
movement.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that there's been a rise in it. So, you get independent, let's call them influencers on social media coming out and saying, no to the system. I want to challenge the current narrative. You don't think there's been an influx of that into the
I think
narrative?
it's manufactured. I think it's manufactured.
Okay, so if it's manufactured and people are, there's been a rise in activism, can that not only be a good thing? And I know what you're saying is that they want to introduce another narrative and they want
No,
to introduce
not
another
all the
system,
time.
right?
Because yeah, they might want to, they might have an agenda to implement something, and the way to do it is, like you said, through activism, get people to believe in a certain thing, and then they can implement it.
Okay, so get people to believe in something. So let's use Trump's tariffs as an example, right? That's been international news. So what do you think he's trying to do there? Is it
Okay.
is he protecting the USA, or is it a form of political messaging or bullying, or he's just trying to flex internationally so he brings back the US to become the leader of the free world again?
Yeah, I think you're right there, but I just want to touch on something to finish our thought on the Age of Aquarius, something that came to me, and I think this was written about by Velikovsky, the Russian scientist, that he noticed throughout history that there was now there's a big debate between the theory of evolution and know that humans are this divine species created by what we know as God, and I'm of the belief that both of them are at work at the same time. So you've got this evolution happening, but also you have this evolutionary jump that happens through these periods where this energy coming through the sun that we're about to enter or we are entering happen certain periods of these celestial cycles. And this happens through plasma or something like that, right? And I'll give you an example that sounds ridiculous, but there was an episode of The Simpsons when Lisa has this school assignment, and she's got this like a little dish of bacteria or whatever, right? And then it's hit by I don't remember if it was hit by light or it was like plasma or
No,
lightning.
no, the bacteria. I recall the episode. The
Yeah,
bacteria basically created this little city. Uh,
exactly. Then it created life, intelligent life, and
yeah,
then
so
it became alive. And
from a from a petri dish, it ended up
yeah,
becoming this little
okay. So
civilization.
where this dish, and then this light or energy or plasma from, let's, for a better term, God, hits it and gives it an evolutionary jump, an instant jump, not evolution that takes, millions and thousands of years. It happens instantly. This is what they say this energy is. Velikovsky was trying to explain why some creatures can sort of evolve instantly where others don't, and he was explaining it through this kind of this plasma that hit the earth at certain times, and this is what perhaps is happening now at this age, and we're going to hit this. This energy is going to hit, and we're going to have this evolutionary jump. Perhaps I'm not sure,
Okay,
but
so
yeah,
so
that's just an interesting thought. Something that I researched, and I thought it was an
well,
interesting way of bridging that gap between evolution and divine creation.
yeah, but
Okay.
that's one researcher's, I guess, hypothesis or theory.
Yeah,
I
it's
could.
just an interesting one.
No, that's fine, and I could bring in the discussion of the Anunnaki, for example. The theory that Enlil and Enki were the Anunnaki gods that worked with DNA of apes or whatever and produced humans because they mated with the female humans, etc. That's another theory, right?
Okay, now that's a good theory, and that could have happened, but who created them? It always goes back to then who created them? Who created them? So this is why I'm saying that if it's that energy, that godlike energy, it gives you that evolutionary jump. So because then someone would have had to done that to the Anunnaki, you know what I mean? To see how far back do you go? It's like the chicken before the egg. So
Well, this is a very existential question or a
mm,
extremely esoteric question in terms of, where did we come from? Why are we here? Right? Which I don't think it's right for this podcast, but
no.
it certainly opens a discussion for our listeners to provide some sort of feedback on what their beliefs are. But I've read a lot about the Anunnaki and the theory of they came to Earth and we are a prison planet and they just feed off our energy, all that sort of stuff,
Yeah,
right?
okay, good, good. But I view the Anunnaki and those characters as they're allegories for planets and clashes of what happened. There was a celestial war. And
Mm,
what I mean by war, I mean conflict or battle, whatever you want to call it, where there was a transaction of energy and lightning and plasma. And that's why you see Mars with scars on it. And the Thunderbolts project
mm,
have, if you're not aware of them, they're this group of scientists who are trying to, rewrite our history in terms of how
mm,
we got here and how all the planets were formed and their idea that the Anunnaki who created humans is a metaphor for all these planets, giving this energy and like I said, this plasma and giving an evolutionary jump to what was here. And so there's other ways of looking at that. And when people think Anunnaki, they think people or giants, and
mhm.
there could be metaphors for planets, and this energy. That's all I'm saying.
So how do you explain something like the Nephilim, for example?
Same thing.
Do you think it's an allegory?
Comets or energies, or celestial bodies. The Bible has made everything literal. The
Mm, mm,
demon, the angel with the angel of light, which is the angle of light.
mhm, mhm,
Everything's become. They make everything into human form. God
mm,
becomes a man. You know
mm.
what I mean? It's this whole thing. Everything becomes literal, and when you do that, you lose sight of everything. You just that's my interpretation. Not only mine. A lot of people who researchers who look into the esoteric
Have
have
you
found this. Yeah.
have you seen Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ?
No.
Not
No,
interested?
no, I'm not going there. No,
No?
no.
A bit of a touchy subject for you?
Next topic.
Oh, there's no. We're free flowing here. We're free balling, as you said. This is.
Okay.
You don't want to go down the religion
No,
path, and no.
no.
Okay, okay,
Because I've expressed my view on it. I think they're allegories that have been confounded into literal form into persons, and they represent something else.
okay. All right. Well, perhaps this is a narrative that we could put out to our listeners for them to give us their theories or their beliefs on what they feel about that in particular. But look, if we, yeah, I want to go back to what I mentioned previously about these, and again, this is a global topic about the tariffs that the
Oh
US
yeah.
have introduced. As I said earlier, do you think this is a form of economic bullying,
Okay.
or is it just Trump trying to flex his muscle to say, we want to make America great again. Let's bring back, we're going to
Okay.
become the leaders of the free world again.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
and and
Good.
and 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 just so I can finish, what does this say about the global supply chains, or
Yeah.
is this going to be long term and temporary? Because we've seen him double back and say, oh, we've got tariffs now, we don't have tariffs for 2 weeks, now we've got tariffs again, etc. So where do you see this heading, and what does it all mean?
Okay. All this stuff, when you talk about, the economy and nations, but the geopolitical landscape and all this stuff that's happening, I don't take any of it seriously because the one thing that no one is addressing
Mm,
yet, but they're talking about it, is the demographics. Nothing is going to change in America or improve. He can do whatever he wants with the economy, tariffs, whatever the hell you want to do. I don't care. To me, it's all just talk. If it doesn't address the demographics of the nation, we're fucked. The West is,
Are
for a
you,
better
are you,
term.
are you talking about immigration?
Yeah, the demographics, like, America, if it doesn't have a strong majority of, white Europeans who created that nation to where, and you can say the same about Australia, Canada,
Mm,
any nation in the West today, England, it's happening in Europe. If you don't address that issue,
mm,
it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you do with the economy. People from, Asia or Africa or the Middle East are not Western European. They're not
mm,
white
mm,
people. They're not going to handle situations the same way. They're not going to work in the same manner. They've got different ways of doing things. Those Western nations were great for a reason. They were built to that, and when I say great, great in terms of, military power,
yeah, that's
wealth,
right. Yeah,
economy,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm not, you can argue for, okay, well, they declined in the spiritual form or whatever. Yes, okay, you can have that
Mm,
argument, but I'm not talking about that. But we're talking about economies here. If you're not going to address that issue, it doesn't matter what
mm,
you do.
mm.
Okay, it's free fall for all the West. They're gonna collapse. Okay, and people are seeing this now in places like Canada and Australia, especially.
Yeah, you're right.
People are arguing about this all
Mm,
day. But okay, what are you doing about it? Well,
mm,
the way of doing business has changed. The way, um, trust. Look, you can't have an economy without trust. Okay,
mm.
you can't have commerce without trust. If trust is eroded and ways of doing business, forget it. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what he talks about tariffs and aligning this country with this country. It doesn't matter to me. I want to see the demographics addressed. And until we start seeing complete halt of immigration and introduction of re-immigration, which I think is going to be the next thing that everyone's going to start talking about. Okay, we're
Can
at
you
the
can you
phase
can
where,
you just define re-immigration?
yeah. Oh, we're at the stage where everyone's complaining about immigration.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
Now, this is upsetting people. We're going to get to a point where people are going to start talking about re-immigration, where people are going to start going back. So people who have recently come into the country have to go back to their country of origin. Now, it's going to begin with that, and I think it might even progress to a point where people who were born in that country
mm.
will be sent back to the country
Sure,
of their
surely
parents.
not.
Yeah, you think that? I believe that's where we're gonna get to that point.
So
Yeah,
what you're basically saying is that they're going to take away our human right of freedom of movement.
human rights.
Freedom of movement. We're on this planet. Sure, we pay
Yeah,
taxes and we
yeah,
do all
we're
that
gonna
sort of
go
stuff.
back. Where I feel we're gonna go back to tribal societies, city states. You know, it wasn't that long ago we were in city states. I mean,
Mhm.
I think the rise of nation states were in line with the rise of corporations. It was
Mm.
just it's a modern invention. I mean, if you look at Italy, for instance, I'll give you an example. Germany, they became a united nation only in the late 1800s. It's not that
Mhm.
long ago. America was originally formed by individual states with sovereign, rights. They've become a nation, a one nation only, in recent times. I don't think it's that far-fetched to say we're going to go back to city states where city states allows, more cohesion, a smaller ethnic
Mhm.
population. You can easily, if there's too many of, foreigners in there, you can easily identify them and remove them. And
Sure.
so, mate, it's just trust has eroded society. You see it everywhere. I mean, you can just say, I don't feel comfortable seeing my children go into the city. You know, growing up in Australia, in Melbourne, I used to go into the city at the age of 14, quite young, on my
Mm,
own. I
yeah.
never felt threatened or, I was never fearful. My parents didn't fear, me doing that. I don't believe that would be the case today. Trust has been eroded.
Yeah.
So
You're right. Trust is probably the right word to
it,
use
it's
because as a 14-year-old, you could have taken the train and gone in on your own without a problem.
hmm
Now
yeah.
it's kind of a scary thing. Like, you and I both very well know because we're located in Europe. I've been in instances where I've been on a train from London to Edinburgh where you've had 10, 11-year-old kids traveling on their own, which is based on what is seen today in Australia and Canada, like you've said, it's kind of an anomaly.
Yeah, and that, if they continue down that, imagine they continue down this path of, immigration, diversity,
Hmm.
all that stuff's just going to get worse. So the end result of that would be complete breakdown of, society, and what you'll create is zones. I mean, they show this in some, in 1984, those kind of films. And,
Hmm.
when they show films of the future where you've got zones, or you can't move into that area, the police won't even go in that area,
Hunger Games
yeah,
and
police state, no
yeah.
one, you can't, I mean, people say, yeah, that's where it's heading, but
Mm.
not even a government can really function in that kind of society for too long. They'll get overthrown. You know what I mean? They'll get overthrown. It doesn't suit them in the long run either.
How would you explain what's happening in the Middle East? When I say Middle East, I'm talking about, I think it's in Dubai, that project, the line. Are you familiar with
Yeah,
that?
I don't think that's going to happen. I
Okay.
don't think that's going to happen. But
Okay.
see, those areas, Dubai and that, appeals to a certain mindset.
Mm.
Like I know people who are, of European ancestry, or for a better term, the West, American or Australian, and they're happy to go and live in a place, an Islamic country like Dubai, and forego the lifestyle they're used to, their culture, their traditions. It's beyond anything that I'm willing to do, but they can do that only because it benefits them financially.
Mm.
Like, you get tax breaks, or you get, because that's what they value above all else is material wealth, or having a comfortable material existence. So
Right.
those places, like you said, Saudi Arabia, will appeal to those type of people,
Right.
definitely. But it's not going to work for everyone.
Geez, that was kind of a cool chat. Would you agree?
Yeah, and we we had all these other topics to touch on, which we wrote down. We haven't
Look,
got we haven't managed to get to them, but we will do another one, and we'll probably
I think this is going to be a little bit of a series because, like I said, there are a
yeah,
lot of topics that we need to discuss that are broader topics for general
yeah,
discussion. So, but for me, things like the Great Reset, artificial intelligence, etc., and this depends on where you stand in your views, is we can feel it. There's this shaking up of everything that we thought was kind of
mm,
stable about everything, about work, creativity, life in general. So
society, immigration.
society, immigration. But these topics that we've raised today, they kind of, for me, they kind of orbit the same sort of question. How do we make sense of existence, of the world, when everything feels so unsettled? Things feel unstable. The future feels uncertain more than ever, right? So you and I don't have the answers. Maybe no one does. But if there's one thing that I hope that our listeners take away, it's this, is that they keep asking questions, they stay curious, and above all, they're not afraid to sit with a little uncertainty. So thanks for coming along on this journey today. To all our listeners, to your subscribers, I certainly can't wait to dive deeper into the other ideas that we've got, perhaps part 2 next month of this series that we've called Meeting of the Minds. Until then, take care of yourself and keep wondering. This is Phoenician Hunter and 369 Lumineer signing off.